Human rights. We hear that phrase all the time, right? But what does it actually mean? Where did this incredibly powerful idea even come from? And what are the big challenges it's facing today? Okay, let's jump right in and unpack the story of human rights. So here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll get to the core idea of what a right even is. Then we'll trace how our understanding of rights has evolved through three distinct generations. After that, we'll look at how these ideas got written down into a global rulebook. And finally, we'll get into the tough debates that are shaping the future of human rights right now. All right, first up, let's start at the very beginning and explore the most fundamental question of all. What is a human right? Before we even get to the dictionary definition, just think about it for a second. What is it that takes a simple need or a demand and elevates it to the special status of being a human right? Well, the term itself is actually pretty modern. It really took off after World War II, especially with the creation of the United Nations. And it was a very deliberate choice of words. It replaced older ideas like natural rights, and maybe most importantly, it got rid of the rights of man, which, let's be honest, often left out women. The new term, human rights, was designed from the ground up to be for everybody. So, what are the building blocks? What makes a right a human right? There are really four core characteristics. First, they are demands for a fair slice of the pie, a just share of power and resources. Second, they're not just nice-to-haves. They are fundamental. Third, they're not a blank check. My right to swing my fist ends where your nose begins. And finally, and this is the really big one, they are universal. They belong to every single person on the planet, no matter what. Okay, so keeping that definition in our back pocket, let's move on. The idea of human rights didn't just appear out of thin air, fully formed. It grew and it changed over time. And a really helpful way to understand that growth is by looking at what are called the three generations of rights. Each of these generations was a product of its time, a response to the big problems people are facing. The first generation was born out of the great revolutions in the 17th and 18th centuries. The second generation, that was a direct reaction to the chaos and inequality of the Industrial Revolution. And the third is really a creation of our modern, globalized world. Now, this brings us to a really fascinating shift in thinking. You can boil it down to this: freedoms from versus rights to. The first generation rights are all about protecting you from things, like an abusive government. It's about building a fence around the individual. But the second generation rights, they're about what you have a right to. They argue the state has a responsibility to actively provide things so that people can actually have a decent life. So these first-generation rights, these are probably the ones that come to mind first. We're talking freedom of speech, the right to a fair trial, the right to vote. The main idea here is pretty simple: protect the individual from a government that gets too powerful. Then the second generation came along and basically flipped the whole idea on its head. In a world of factories and slums, they argued that freedom from the state doesn't mean much if you're uneducated and can't feed your family. So these rights, like the right to an education, to social security, to safe working conditions, they demand that the government step in and take action to create a more equal society. And that brings us to the third generation, often called solidarity rights. These are the collective rights, the group rights, for a world where our problems cross borders. Think about the right to a healthy environment. Climate change doesn't care about passports. Or the right to peace and humanitarian aid. These are problems we all have to solve together. Okay, so we've got these powerful ideas, these generations of rights. But how do you turn a philosophy into actual written down rules for the entire planet? That's what we're going to dig into next. After its founding, the UN started the long, slow process of turning these concepts into law. It kicked off in a huge way with the Universal Declaration in 1948, but it didn't stop there. For decades, they kept building, adding legally binding treaties that focused on specific problems like racism, discrimination against women, and the rights of children. And right at the very heart of this whole legal system is what's called the International Bill of Human Rights. Think of it as a three-part package. You have the original 1948 Declaration, which was like a powerful mission statement. Then you have two covenants from 1976 that took those ideas and made them legally binding for the countries that signed them. And just look at this quote. It's from Article 28 of that original 1948 document, and it is just so incredibly forward-thinking. It basically says that everyone has a right to live in a world where all these other rights can actually become a reality. It's like it was planting the seed for that entire third generation of rights, decades before they were even a common idea. So who's the referee in all of this? Well, within the UN, you have bodies like the General Assembly and the High Commissioner for Human Rights. They're in charge of monitoring and promoting these rules. But, and this is a huge but, they don't have a global police force. Their power comes from persuasion and public pressure, which sets up the biggest challenge of all. Because, of course, having a rule book and getting everyone to actually follow the rules are two totally different things. And this brings us to our last section, the huge challenges and the fierce debates that are happening right now over the future of human rights. A central fight that has never gone away is this one: universalism versus relativism. The universalist side says, look, these rights are for everyone, everywhere, period. It doesn't matter what your culture is. But the relativist argument pushes back and says, not so fast. Our specific culture, our traditions, they determine what we see as a right and how important it is. And that leads to what is maybe the toughest pill to swallow. After all the treaties and all the laws, the entire international human rights system is, at the end of the day, voluntary. There's no world government to come in and enforce them. It all relies on the willing cooperation of individual countries. So we'll leave you with this final massive question to think about. If we really believe that human rights are universal, that they belong to every person on Earth just for being human, then who is ultimately responsible for making sure everyone gets them? Is it just your own government? Should other countries step in? Or is it somehow up to all of us? That is the question that continues to shape our world.